rain lashed against the fogged cafe windows as Sophie Miller, a poor waitress with weary eyes and calloused hands, served her last table of the night. But she didn't know her stepmother had already sold her future. By dawn, she would be forced to marry Ethan Cole, the quiet, shabby man everyone in town mocked for his threadbare coat and old boots. They said he was just another poor wanderer barely surviving on odd jobs, but his calm eyes hid a secret far greater than anyone could imagine. He was a billionaire prince living in disguise. As Sophie stood trembling in her wedding dress that wasn't hers, beneath the cruel gaze of her stepmother and the whispers of the townspeople, one question echoed through her heart. Who really was this man she was being forced to marry? And what shocking truth was he hiding behind those silent, knowing eyes? The storm hadn't stopped since morning. Gray clouds hung heavy over Willow Creek, a small forgotten town where dreams often died before they began. Inside Maple Street Diner, Sophie Miller's trembling hands wiped down the same counter for the third time. The scent of burnt coffee filled the air as rain dripped through a hole in the ceiling, landing with a steady, hopeless rhythm. She had worked there since she was 16. Ever since her father died and her stepmother, Margaret, took over everything, the house, the money, and Sophie's life. Quit standing there like a statue, Margaret snapped from the doorway, her voice sharp as broken glass. You think wiping that counter will make you rich? Go serve table 5. Sophie bit her lip, swallowing the reply that burned on her tongue. Her worn shoes squeaked against the linoleum as she carried a tray to a corner booth, where a quiet man sat alone. He always came at closing time. Same seat, same black coffee, same silence. His coat was frayed at the edges, his hair tousled by rain, and his eyes, deep, unreadable, seemed to hold stories too heavy for words. Here's your coffee, she murmured, setting the cup down gently. Thank you. Miss Miller, he said softly, his voice calm, almost royal in its restraint. She blinked. No one ever called her Miss Miller, not even the customers who owed her tips. She looked at him closer but said nothing. His name was Ethan Cole, or so the townspeople said. They whispered that he once worked at the auto shop before it burned down. Others claimed he lived out by the old train yard. Nobody knew for sure. He never bragged, never begged, just worked quietly, paid his bills, and left before anyone could pry. Margaret's shrill voice broke Sophie's brief calm. Sophie, close up. We've got business tonight, Sophie frowned. Business at night meant trouble. Her stepmother never missed an opportunity to trade Sophie's time or dignity for money. But tonight Margaret's smile was different. There was something cold and triumphant in it. Hours later, the rain had deepened into a downpour. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, her apron still damp, when Margaret dropped a folded paper before her. Pack your things, she said, lighting a cigarette. You're getting married tomorrow. Sophie's heart stopped. Married to who? To that man who comes to the diner. Ethan Cole, don't look so shocked. He agreed to it. What? Sophie's voice cracked. You can't just... I can and I have, Margaret interrupted. You owe me. You live under my roof, eat my food, and work in my diner. You'll marry him, or you'll be out on the street like your useless mother before you. The words sliced through Sophie's chest. Her mother had died penniless, working herself to death to give Sophie a chance at life. Now it felt like her own life was being sold off like cheap property. But why him? She whispered. Margaret smirked. Because he's desperate. Says he wants companionship. Who knows? Maybe he's too poor to find anyone else. Either way, you'll be his problem, not mine. That night, Sophie cried quietly into her pillow. Outside, thunder rolled like the echo of her broken future. She remembered her father's words. Never let them steal your kindness, Sophie. Even when the world tries. But how could she stay kind when kindness had only brought her pain? The next morning, the church bells rang through the mist. Sophie stood before the cracked mirror in her room, wearing a torn second-hand dress. Her reflection didn't look like a bride. It looked like a prisoner. Margaret entered holding a wilted bouquet and that same cruel smile. Try to look happy. At least pretend, she hissed. Outside the church, a small crowd had gathered. Whispers rippled through them like smoke. Poor girl. Marrying that janitor. Her stepmother must be desperate. They say he doesn't even have a home. Sophie's hands shook as she stepped inside. Ethan was already there, standing at the altar in a faded gray suit. His posture was straight, his expression calm, but when his eyes met hers, something in them softened. For a moment, time stopped. She saw no poverty in him, only quiet strength. It unsettled her, as though he knew something she didn't. When the priest asked if she would take Ethan Cole as her husband, her voice trembled. I do. Ethan's voice, steady and sure, echoed back. I do. As the ceremony ended and the villagers dispersed, Margaret slipped the priest a small envelope, payment for a deal sealed in misery. Sophie stood there numb, watching as Ethan turned to her. I know you didn't choose this, he said quietly, but I promise you, Sophie, you'll never regret it, she frowned. Why would I not regret being forced to marry a man I barely know? Ethan's lips curved in a faint smile. Because sometimes the poorest man has the richest heart, and sometimes what seems like punishment is the beginning of something extraordinary. His words lingered like smoke, both comforting and mysterious. As he led her toward the waiting car, an old pickup that seemed too polished for a poor man's ride, Sophie couldn't help but wonder, who exactly was Ethan Cole? And what secret did he carry behind those calm, knowing eyes? The rain had softened into a mist by the time Ethan drove Sophie away from the small, gossip-stained church. The wipers moved rhythmically across the windshield, slicing through the fog. Sophie sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching her hands together as though afraid they might tremble too loudly. She had expected to be taken to some broken-down shack on the edge of town, but as the car rolled past familiar streets and veered toward the countryside, she grew uneasy. Where are we going? She asked finally. Ethan glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Home. Your home? She pressed. Our home, he corrected, his tone gentle but firm. Sophie's brows furrowed. Nothing about this made sense. They passed green hills and winding dirt roads until the car turned through an iron gate that creaked open automatically. Her breath caught as a large estate emerged from the mist. A mansion veiled in ivy with sprawling gardens glistening from the rain. Her heart pounded. This can't be yours. Ethan parked beside the marble fountain and stepped out, rain misting across his hair. It's been empty for a while, he said simply. But it's home. Sophie followed him hesitantly, the weight of disbelief pressing against her chest. Inside, the grand foyer smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Polished floors reflected the chandelier light, and portraits lined the walls, portraits of noble faces she didn't recognize, each wearing the same sharp eyes Ethan had. I don't understand, she whispered. You were supposed to be poor. A janitor, they said. Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable. And you believed them? She stammered, unsure how to respond. He stepped closer, his gaze soft but piercing. Sometimes people wear masks to protect themselves, Sophie. Sometimes wealth hides behind simplicity, and truth behind silence. His words sent a strange chill through her, one that wasn't entirely fear. There was something hauntingly calm about him, as if he carried centuries of secrets beneath that quiet demeanor. Later that evening, Sophie stood by the window of the guest room, her room now, and watched as fog rolled across the garden. Down below, she saw Ethan speaking with an older man in a dark suit. The man bowed slightly before handing him a folder. Ethan opened it, glanced through its contents, and nodded. The sight only deepened her confusion. What kind of poor man had people bowing to him and estates hidden in the hills? When Ethan came upstairs, Sophie turned quickly, pretending to fix her hair. So, she said, trying to sound calm, what exactly is this place? It was my father's summer home, Ethan replied. He passed away years ago. Oh, she hesitated. And your family? He looked away. Far away now. But some legacies never really leave us. There was a heaviness in his voice, the kind that came from loss and guilt. Sophie wanted to ask more, but the words stuck in her throat. Over dinner, the tension lingered like fog. She ate quietly, aware of his every movement. Ethan was composed, graceful even in simplicity. He didn't eat like a poor man. He didn't speak like one either. Every gesture seemed deliberate, every glance thoughtful. Finally, she asked, "Why did you agree to this marriage?" Ethan met her eyes, the candlelight flickering between them. "Because I wanted to help you." Her fork froze midway to her mouth. "Help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said softly. "I've seen how your stepmother treats you. I've seen how you work yourself to exhaustion in that diner, how you give kindness to people who give you nothing back. You deserved an escape." Sophie's chest tightened. "So you married me out of pity?" "No," he said immediately, voice low but firm. "Out of purpose." There was something in his tone, a quiet conviction that both frightened and fascinated her. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. Her mind churned with questions. Who was Ethan Cole, really? Why hide his wealth? And why choose her of all people? When she finally drifted into uneasy slumber, a dream took hold. She saw Ethan standing in a grand hall dressed in royal attire, a crown resting beside him. He turned toward her, his eyes burning with sorrow. Not yet, he whispered. They can't know. She jolted awake, sweat dampening her brow. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Slowly, she crept to the door and peeked out. Ethan was standing in front of a large painting, a portrait of a man who looked exactly like him, only older, wearing a jeweled crown. He whispered something she could barely hear. I'll make it right, Father. I promise. Sophie stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. Every instinct told her that her life had just become entangled in something far bigger than she could understand. And as the clock struck midnight, one haunting thought refused to leave her mind. Who was Ethan Cole really? And what was he planning to do that could make things right? Morning light filtered through the long velvet curtains, painting golden lines across the marble floor. Sophie awoke to the sound of distant piano music echoing through the halls. A slow, melancholic melody that made the walls seem alive with memory. She dressed quietly and followed the sound, her bare feet brushing over the cold floor. Ethan sat at the grand piano in the drawing room, his fingers moving effortlessly across the keys. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and unspoken regret. Sophie stood by the doorway watching. For a moment he seemed like someone from another world, elegant, disciplined, and painfully alone. When he finally noticed her, he smiled faintly. You're up early. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. Your music. It sounds sad. Sometimes sadness reminds us that we're still human, he said softly, closing the piano. Would you like breakfast? Sophie nodded, though her mind was miles away. She followed him to the sunlit dining hall, where a full breakfast had already been set. She stared at the spread, fresh bread, berries, and eggs cooked perfectly. It looked like something out of a dream. Who made all this? She asked in disbelief. I did, Ethan said simply. Old habits. Sophie couldn't hide her confusion anymore. You speak like someone who's been trained in a palace. You cook like a chef, dress like a gentleman, and live in a mansion. Who are you really, Ethan? He looked up slowly, meeting her gaze. Would you believe me if I said I was just a man trying to find peace? No, she whispered, because peace doesn't come wrapped in silk and secrets. His lips twitched in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're observant, that's dangerous. Dangerous? Because you might start seeing what others overlook. Before Sophie could ask more, a knock echoed from the front door. Ethan's posture stiffened instantly. He rose and walked to the entrance, his tone lowering. Stay here, he said firmly. She ignored the warning and peeked around the corner anyway. A black car gleamed outside, and two men in suits stood beneath the awning. They bowed slightly as Ethan stepped out. Your Highness, one said. It's time, Sophie's breath caught. Your Highness? Ethan's voice was calm but sharp. I told you never to address me by that name here. But the council insists, sir. The succession announcement, Ethan cut him off. Not yet. Tell them I'm not ready. Your father's legacy, I said not yet. His voice thundered through the open door, then softened into a whisper. Not until I fix what I broke. The men exchanged glances and bowed again. As you wish, Your Highness. Then they left, the car vanishing into the mist. Sophie stood frozen, her world spinning. Ethan closed the door slowly and turned to find her staring at him. You heard, he said quietly. She nodded, her voice trembling. You're a prince. A real one. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Was not anymore. I left that life behind. Why? She demanded. Why pretend to be poor? Why hide in a small town and marry someone like me? He hesitated, then gestured for her to sit. Because power destroyed my family. My father ruled a kingdom built on lies and pride. When I was old enough to inherit, I saw the corruption, the greed. I couldn't be part of it. So I left, walked away from everything. I became Ethan Cole, a nobody. I thought I could atone for my family's sins by living simply, by helping others quietly. Sophie's anger softened into confusion. Then why marry me? Because I saw the same pain in you, he said gently. You were trapped in your stepmother's cruelty, the way I was trapped in a kingdom that used me. I thought, maybe by saving you, I could start forgiving myself. Her eyes welled. But you lied to me. I did, he admitted. But not about who I am now. I'm not the prince I once was. I'm a man trying to make things right. Silence filled the room, heavy and raw. Sophie looked away, her heart torn between resentment and awe. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove her into town. Word had already spread about their strange marriage, and whispers followed them wherever they went. But Sophie noticed something. People treated Ethan differently now. The banker who once ignored him nodded respectfully. The grocer called him sir. It was as if the town had sensed a shift in his presence. At the market, a young boy ran up to Sophie, handing her a small bouquet of daisies. For you, ma'am. Mr. Ethan said you liked flowers. Sophie turned to him, startled, but Ethan only smiled. I did a little research, he said, eyes twinkling. Your father used to plant daisies by your porch, didn't he? Tears stung her eyes. No one had remembered that in years. That night, as they walked back toward the car under a soft drizzle, Sophie finally spoke. If you left your world behind, why do I feel like it's coming back for you? Ethan's jaw tightened. Because it is. He glanced toward the distant hills where faint headlights glimmered in the fog. Black cars approaching, fast. And for the first time, Sophie saw fear in his eyes. The night had turned cold and restless. The wind moaned through the tall trees surrounding the estate as if warning that something terrible was coming. Sophie stood at the window of her room, watching the line of black cars snake up the hill. Their headlights pierced the fog like silent threats. Down below, Ethan stood alone on the front steps, his figure calm against the chaos forming in the distance. Her heart thudded painfully. Who were they? Why were they here for him now? She rushed downstairs, her bare feet echoing on the marble floor. Ethan, what's happening? She demanded. He didn't look at her. They found me, he said quietly. I knew this day would come. Who? The Royal Council, he said, his voice hardening. They're the advisors who ruled after I left. They've been searching for me ever since my father's death. They want me back on the throne. Sophie's breath caught. Isn't that good? He turned to her then, and the pain in his eyes told her everything. It's not that simple. When I left, I didn't just abandon the crown, I exposed their corruption. They lost millions when I refused to sign their deceitful decrees. To them, I'm not a prince. I'm a traitor. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the courtyard. Men in dark suits moved quickly, their steps purposeful. A tall, silver-haired man led them, his expression cold as steel. Ethan straightened his coat. Stay inside, he told Sophie. No matter what happens, don't come out. But Sophie grabbed his hand. You can't face them alone. He looked down at her hand on his, and for a moment his calm cracked. I've spent years hiding to protect the people I love, he said softly. Don't make me fail again. Before she could reply, the front doors swung open and the silver-haired man stepped inside, flanked by guards. His voice boomed through the hall. Your Highness, he said mockingly, you've been difficult to find. Ethan's expression didn't waver. Lord Asher, he said, still pretending to serve the kingdom while lining your own pockets, I see. Asher smirked. The people suffer because you abandoned them. The council is in ruin, the throne empty. You are coming back, with or without your consent. Ethan's tone sharpened. If I return, I'll rebuild the kingdom without corruption. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? Asher's eyes darkened. You think your little waitress bride makes you untouchable? His gaze slid toward Sophie, predatory and cruel. Does she even know who you are? Sophie's pulse spiked. Ethan stepped between them instantly. Leave her out of this. Then cooperate, Asher said coldly. Or she'll pay for your defiance. Ethan's jaw tightened. Sophie could feel the storm inside him, the conflict between fury and restraint. He took a step closer to Asher. If you touch her, I will burn your empire to ashes. Asher laughed, a sound too smooth to be human. Still the same righteous prince. You always had your father's temper. He motioned to his men. Take him. Before Sophie could react, chaos erupted. Ethan lunged forward, knocking one of the guards aside with surprising strength. The chandelier above them swayed wildly as the struggle filled the hall. Sophie screamed his name, but Ethan's voice cut through the noise. Run, Sophie! She froze, every instinct telling her to stay. But something in his tone shattered her courage. She turned and bolted up the staircase as glass shattered below. The sound of gunfire rang out, followed by Asher's furious shout. In the guest room, Sophie's hand shook as she opened the window. The rain had begun again, heavy and relentless. She looked back toward the door, praying Ethan would appear. Instead, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. The door burst open. Ethan stumbled in, blood staining his sleeve but determination burning in his eyes. "We're leaving," he said, grabbing her hand. They ran through the corridor, down a hidden passage she hadn't noticed before. It led to an underground garage where a sleek black car waited. He pressed a button on the dashboard and the gate opened into the dark forest. "Ethan, what now? Where will we go?" she asked, voice trembling. He gripped the wheel tighter. "Somewhere they can't reach us. Somewhere I can make things right. Why not fight them? You're their prince." His eyes flickered toward her. A true leader doesn't fight for power, he fights for peace. And peace starts with survival. They drove for miles until dawn began to break, golden light cutting through the mist. Finally, Ethan pulled over by a quiet lakeside. He stepped out, the morning sun illuminating his face. Sophie followed, watching him stare across the still water. "You could go back," she said softly. "Take the throne. Clear your name." Ethan shook his head. "If I return, they'll destroy everything that matters. But if I rebuild from the outside, use my wealth, my name quietly, I can expose them without wearing their crown." He turned to her, his voice tender now. "You gave me a reason to fight again, Sophie. Not for revenge, but for hope." Tears welled in her eyes. "You saved me from my stepmother. And now you're saving your people." "But who saves you?" He smiled faintly. "You already did." For a long moment they stood in silence, the sunrise glimmering on the lake like gold. Then Ethan took something from his pocket. A ring, delicate and royal, yet humble in design. "This belonged to my mother," he said quietly. "It's the only piece of the kingdom I kept. It doesn't represent power, it represents promise." He slipped it onto her finger. "No matter what happens next, you'll never be poor again. Not because of wealth, but because you'll never walk alone." Sophie's tears spilled freely now, mingling with the dawn's light. "And your secret?" she whispered. "What happens when the world learns the poor man I married was a billionaire prince?" Ethan's smile deepened, gentle and resolute. "Then they'll finally understand that love doesn't come from thrones or titles. It comes from truth." Behind them, the horizon blazed with light, and the sound of sirens faded into nothing. The prince who had once hidden among the poor, and the poor waitress forced into a cruel marriage, had found something neither of them expected: freedom. And as the first rays of morning broke across the world, Sophie realized the shocking truth wasn't that he was a billionaire prince, but that he had chosen her when he could have had anyone.